Yeah. Well, hey everyone, I'm Janet B., recovered from compulsive eating and bulimia. Happy to be here with you. Let me add my welcome to Melissa, especially to all the new people and even the not so new people. Glad you're here, or we wouldn't have anyone to talk to. So tonight, I'm doing my favorite chapter. We'll probably get about halfway through. We Agnostics. So if you have your big book, we will start on page 44. And again, the one of the luxuries we have in this meeting is we can take our time. If we don't get through a full a chapter in a week, we can take 2 weeks to do it. It's all good. So we agnostics. So it starts out by saying, in the preceding chapters, you've learned something of alcoholism or compulsive eating. Okay, what have we learned? So at this point, where we're starting to work on step 2, which is came to believe a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity, they're telling us we've learned something. So if we flip the page back, bottom of page 43, it summarizes it. It says once more, because they've been drilling this into us for 2 chapters. The alcoholic at certain times has no effective mental defense against the first drink. The compulsive eater, no effective mental defense against the first compulsive bite. That means I can't think my way out of it. I can't keep the memory green, tell myself to just remember how bad it was. That would be a mental defense. No effective mental defense. Except in a few rare cases, neither he nor any other human being can provide such a defense. So there goes the idea of group as higher power, because the group is made up of human beings. And certainly, if a human being can't solve my problem, then a doorknob can't. I know sometimes people say you can have anything as your higher power you want as long as you're not it. But this paragraph alone doesn't bear that out, because they say, okay, we can't be our own defense. Neither he nor any other human being can provide a defense. His defense must come from a higher power. So when they say higher power, capital H, capital P, they're talking about God. So they're telling us we need a spiritual defense. So we flip back to page 44. It says, you've learned something. So what have we learned? Basically, that I am hopeless without some kind of spiritual defense. And they say, okay, we hope you've learned the difference between and I'm just going to change this to compulsive eating terms because that's what most of us are, between the compulsive eater and the non-compulsive eater. The non-compulsive eater can stop if she has a good enough reason to, right? Going back to the high school reunion and we want to make that boy who dumped us when we were 17 jealous. The non-compulsive eater can lose the weight and keep it off. That wasn't my story. So they tell us if when you honestly want to, you can't quit entirely, or if when you take the first compulsive bite, you have little control over the amount you take, you're probably a compulsive eater. So wanting to stop, but being unable to defines an addict. So those of you who've heard my story know that for the first 6.5, 7 years in Overeaters Anonymous, I did not get better. And people would say, oh, you must not want it badly enough. I wanted it more than anything in the world, but I couldn't do it. Wanting to stop, but being unable to, that's what makes me an addict. If I wanted to stop and I could just stop, I wouldn't spend any time in 12-step rooms. Okay. And remember on page 24 of the big book, it says at a certain point in the drinking of every abnormal drinker, he passes into a state where the most powerful desire to stop is of absolutely no avail. So if you're here and you desperately want to stop, but you're unable to, it means you're a real deal compulsive eater. And there's a solution for you in this book. So grab someone here who's recovered, take a number and make a call. So they tell us, okay, if you're the real deal compulsive eater, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. Well, a couple things. First, we'll define a spiritual experience, but they're telling me this is an illness. So an illness has a specific set of symptoms and a specific treatment. Well, that should be a relief to us, right? Because it's not like I'm some freak of nature and I can't stop binging and I'm the only person on the planet like this and there's nothing to be done. No, I have an illness and there's a treatment for it. and they tell me the treatment is spiritual, a spiritual experience. Well, why? Because at its essence, this is a spiritual malady, right? Remember, chapter 5 says, once the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. Okay, so we need to have a spiritual experience. And they say only a spiritual experience will conquer it. I love that. That's like there's a war and there's a conqueror. So it's like God just vanquishes this illness through the mechanism of a spiritual experience. Okay, what is it? Page 25, one of the best paragraphs in the book. The great fact is just this and nothing less. Not that we stop binging or stop drinking, nothing less than this, that we have had deep and effective spiritual experiences. And here's what a spiritual experience does: revolutionize our whole attitude toward life, toward our fellows, and toward God's universe. We start thinking differently about life in general, about other people. We actually start caring about other people and about the world. The central fact of our lives today, and I think for most of us, it used to be ourselves, right? The central fact of my life was myself, but it changes. The central fact of our lives today is the absolute certainty, that's like 100% knowledge, that our creator. So I always like when reading the book to look for clues about God, right? So what does this tell us about one thing about God? Our creator, he created us, has entered into our hearts and lives in a way which is indeed miraculous. So he didn't just create me and then just like spend eternity watching Netflix. Um, he's involved. He's entered into our hearts and our lives in a way which is miraculous. And what does he do there, right? Another clue about God. So what does he do then instead of watching Netflix? He has commenced to accomplish those things for us which we could never do by ourselves. Well, that's a pretty interesting God, right? So if you're like me and you grew up with the concept of, the baseball bat God who is always ready to bop you, well, this tells me that he's my creator. He's willing to like be involved with me. He's willing to do miracles on my behalf. And he does things for me which I could never do by myself. How do we get this thing called spiritual experience? Like, can we just like go down to Target and buy it? No. Step 12. Step 12 actually starts with a promise. Having had a spiritual experience, and in later editions, they change it to spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. So it happens to us automatically, right? It's like you plant some seeds, you water them automatically. I don't know how. How do those seeds turn into like flowers with green stems and all that and leaves? I don't know. But it happens automatically, right? When you add water and sunshine to the seeds, they become flowers. We work these 12 steps and we have a spiritual experience. Okay, so that's what we need. They're saying in order to recover, we need to have a spiritual experience. And then it's like they can almost hear the sighs, like of all the agnostics and atheists in the room. And I might add the practical agnostics. That was people like me. I always believed in God my whole life. But God was there dealing with war and poverty and didn't have time for me, except for the times I treated him like a genie. Come out of your bottle, grant my 3 wishes, and then go back in your bottle and leave me alone. That's a practical agnostic. I believed in God, but he was irrelevant to my life. So they say to one who feels he's an atheist or agnostic, a spiritual experience seems impossible. Isn't that cool that they don't say to one who is an atheist or an agnostic? And we'll go into that in more detail on part 2 of We Agnostics. But sneak preview, what they say on page 55 is deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. It may be obscured by calamity, pomp, worship of other things, but it's there. So here they're saying basically, you may think you're an atheist or agnostic, but just hang on and, just Go through and you'll see you're really not, and that you really do believe in this loving creator who sets up camp in our hearts and does miracles. And they say, okay, if you're like that, you really have two doors, right? Door number one, doomed to a compulsive eating death to keep binging. Door number two, to live on a spiritual basis. There's no door number three, to recover on a non-spiritual basis, at least not in this program. Now, again, there may be other things that work. And if there are, no problem. But for people who are like the real deal compulsive eater, like me, where this is the last stop on the train, they say spiritual experience. They say, but you had so either doomed to a compulsive eating death or live on a spiritual basis. It's interesting. They don't say believe right off the bat. Because from day one, we can start living by some spiritual principles. So, first, we can stop lying, we can stop stealing, right? If from day one, anyone can do that. We can start by our willpower, thinking about other people and doing self sacrifice to help other people. And we can start praying, even if we don't believe in God. If we don't believe in God, we can pray something like this: God, I don't know if you exist. And if you do exist, I don't know if you care about me. But if you do exist and you do care, I need some help. And meanwhile, I'm going to try to live a better life. That's an honest prayer. So just doing that, we're already living on a spiritual basis. And they tell us it's not that hard. We tried to avoid the issue, basically thinking there's a door number three, recover without God. And they're saying, yeah, but after a while, we had to face the fact that we must find a spiritual basis of God. Trust God, clean house, which is clearing away the damage we've done in our past, help other people. They say, or else. Cheer up. Half of us thought we were atheists or agnostics. Our experience shows you need not be disconcerted. You need not be sad about that Santa Claus was real. I would be disconcerted. So I understand if someone who doesn't believe in God feels disconcerted. But they say, cheer up. We're going to help you to get to from point A, where you don't believe, to point B, where you can believe. And then they talk about things that don't work. They say, like, if a mere code of morals, like, I don't know, the Ten Commandments, or a better philosophy of life were sufficient to overcome compulsive eating, we would have recovered long ago. Top of page 45. But we found that these codes and philosophies didn't save us, no matter how much we tried. Didn't save us. Remember, once I've got this illness, once I've crossed that invisible line where I'm a real deal compulsive eater, I can't save myself. I need to be rescued, right? And it says, I can't rescue myself no matter how much I try. If I'm in quicksand, it doesn't matter how hard I try to get out. I'm not going to be able to. And it says, we could wish to be moral, right? I wanted to be a good person. We could wish to be philosophically comforted, to have all this spiritual, stuff we've read just wash over us and transform us in an instant. It says we could will these things on with all our might, but the needed power wasn't there. So there were times I wanted to be unselfish. I genuinely did. And I couldn't sustain it for long, right? I didn't have the power to. It says, our human resources failed utterly. So it's like when it comes to, the resources needed to recover from this, I had zero. Well, what does that even mean? And then they tell us lack of power. That was our dilemma. Not lack of desire, not lack of a good moral code, not lack of a good healthy food plan, lack of power. That was our dilemma. It says we had to find a power by which we could live, and it had to be a power greater than ourselves, obviously. But where and how are we to find this power? Okay, so now we know what the problem is, right? Like if someone has diabetes, the problem is like a pancreas that doesn't work or something like that, right? You know what the problem is. So the solution is tailored to what's causing the problem, what's causing the high blood sugar. Um, so now they tell us our problem is lack of power. So our solution is to find a power greater than myself, really, that I could tap into. I say that's obvious, but how? Where and how? And then they say, again, some of the most beautiful lines in the book. Well, that's exactly what this book is about. Its main object is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself, which will solve your problem. So that is like the mission statement of this book, to enable us to find a power with a capital P, so meaning God, a power greater than ourselves, which will solve our problem. So it's not like we just go and we meditate and we have like a vision of God and we say, okay, I believe in God, but we're still binging our brains out. What good would that be? They're saying you're going to find a power greater than yourself, God, and he's going to solve your problem. So again, if we're looking for clues about God, we've got some right here. If this power greater than myself is going to solve my problem, this power must be able to think. I live down south. There were a bunch of tornado warnings today. A tornado for sure is a power greater than I am. Tornado can't think and solve my problem. If this power is going to solve my problem, this power's got to be pretty smart. I have two master's degrees. I could not figure out how to solve this problem. This power has to be strong because this illness is stronger than I am. So this power has to be stronger than me and stronger than the illness. So we know has the ability to think, powerful, strong, and finally, if this power is going to solve my problem, this power must care about me, right? Otherwise, like this power, God could sit back and say, I know exactly what your problem is. I know exactly how to solve it, but I'm not doing it. And, why is it that way for certain like physical illnesses? I don't know. There's no like 12 steps for Parkinson's, do these 12 things and you automatically recover. I think God's got like a real heart for addicts like us. And if we do certain things, like he removes the food obsession. I don't know why there's not 12 steps for Parkinson's, but there's 12 steps for us. So I would be silly not to take it. So it says that means we've written a book which we believe to be spiritual, right? Which deals with my relationship with God, as well as moral, my relationship with other people, both. They say, and it means we are going to talk about God. So they do not shy away from it and say, oh, if we say the word God, people may leave. That would be like if someone goes to a doctor and has pneumonia and the treatment is penicillin and the doctor and the person says, I don't like taking pills. And the doctor says, well, okay, then just like then just take cough medicine instead. No, the doctor would say, I'm sorry, the only thing I have to offer you is penicillin. It's like kind of take it or leave it. The only thing we have to offer is we are going to talk about God. Says it straight out. And they say, this is difficult for agnostics. A lot of times, a new person, when we explain the illness to them, like the physical allergy and our beautiful fellowship, they're really happy. But his face falls when we talk of spiritual matters, especially when we mention God. So the fellowship, wonderful, necessary. God, impossible to recover without. It says, we've reopened a subject which our man or woman thought he had neatly evaded or entirely ignored. And then it says, we know how he feels. We have shared his honest doubt and prejudice. And then the bottom paragraph on page 45, going into page 46, talks about the different prejudices that we have against God that stop us from believing in God. So for some of us, it's the way we were taught about God doesn't work. So we say there is no God just because like that concept doesn't work. Or maybe it was modeled to us. Maybe we had parents who said they were like really devout and they did some things that were really, we didn't think were in line with what God would do. So those would be prejudices, thinking that, a particular idea with which someone had tried to impress us during childhood, that if it's not that, then there is no God. No, it can be, it's not that. And there is a God. He's just different than what we were brought up with. For sometimes we think that if believing in God makes us weak. Sometimes we say there can't be a God or he wouldn't allow fill in the blank, war, poverty, human trafficking, my relative to die of Parkinson's, my kids not to listen to me. Whatever it is that, we think is wrong in the world, we say there can't be a God because he wouldn't have allowed it. Sometimes we say, you know what, I'm just not going to believe in something that I can't understand. Um, and then sometimes it's just, if I believe in God, I can't do what I want. So those are prejudices that we often have, and we need to work our way through them. We can say, okay, there is war, there is poverty, there is illness, and I don't understand it. But just like Ebby said to Bill, like, Bill, all I know is that when I decided to do what God wanted, when I gave my life to God, the desire to drink was just lifted right out of me. So I don't know why God allows human trafficking, but I don't need to know the mind of God in order to access his power. To say that, depending on God is weak. Well, I guess that would be if I'm, crossing the street and I get hit by a truck and both my legs are broken. Would I ever say to the ambulance driver, don't take me to the hospital, I'll set my own legs. Going to a doctor makes me weak. No. So we don't do it with physical things. And then sometimes it's, if I believe in God, I can't do what I want. And that, yeah, it may be true. We're going to have to make amends. We're going to have to think about other people. We're going to have to stop lying. So, yeah, we might not be able to do everything we want. But again, this book says the illness beats us into a state of reasonableness. Is it reasonable to believe in God? Yes. And if you just look at the people here and talk to people who've recovered, I think they will all tell you that the life they have now is beyond anything they could have planned or dreamed. So they go ahead, page 46. They say, yeah, we have agnostic temperament. So it's like we had an inclination to be agnostic, had those different prejudices, those thoughts and experiences. And they say, we're going to reassure you. As soon as we're able to just put these prejudices aside, to recognize them for what they are, prejudices, not facts, and express even a willingness to believe in a power greater than ourselves, power with capital P, meaning God, we commence to get results. Beautiful expression I heard once: willingness opens the door to grace. Isn't that pretty? I didn't think that up, but I think it's pretty. Willingness opens the door to grace. So as soon as we're willing, we begin to get results. They say, even though it was impossible for any of us to fully define or comprehend that power, which is God. That power is God. So what results do we get? And is that all we need to do? Just be willing to believe? So the next paragraph explains that. So first of all, when they say God, they know we're prickly people. And they say we don't have to consider another's conception of God. Our own conception, however inadequate, and I think it's always going to be inadequate. I don't think I will ever fully understand God. It's sufficient to make the approach and to effect a contact with him. Isn't that cool? Not just belief, like contact, as in relationship. So one time I thought, let me go through the big book because our problem is lack of power and see when we get our first like infusion of power. When do we start getting power? Here it is, page 46. As soon as we admitted the possible existence of, and look at these beautiful names for God, creative intelligence, God's creative, God's smart, a spirit of the universe underlying the totality of things. As soon as we admitted it, we began to be possessed of a new sense of power and direction, provided we took other simple steps. So, what was my problem? Lack of power. So, my solution is power. And here it's like a pick line of grace into our hearts. We start getting power, and not just power, but direction, as in, what do I need to do next in my life? What do I need to do? Provided we take other simple steps. So I can't just say, okay, I'm willing to believe in God. Now I'm going to go rob a bank, right? We have to, that's an extreme example, but we have to continue on with the steps. And then the next sentence tells us something else about God, another clue. God does not make too hard terms with those who seek him. You know, I love it. It reminds me of like when we used to play hide and seek with our kids. You know, it's like you don't hide in a tricky place. You hide where you can be found. God wants us to seek him, but he doesn't hide in a tricky place where we can't find him. And they tell us the realm of spirit is broad, roomy, all inclusive, never exclusive or forbidding. God is never exclusive, never forbidding. And the realm of the spirit is open to all who earnestly seek. But we have to seek, right? We have to seek. And that's why, by the way, when I start sponsoring someone, I tell her that every morning she needs to spend 30 minutes with God in prayer, meditation, spiritual reading. If she doesn't believe in God, well, what better way to get to believe in God than spend time with him? Talk to him, you know, just say, God, I'm not sure you're even listening, but I'm talking. Write a letter to him, you know, listen, see if anything comes to you. Read a book about him. Page 47. When therefore we speak to you of God, we mean your own conception of God. This applies to other spiritual expressions you find in this book. And here's an action we can take. Don't let any prejudice you may have against spiritual terms deter you from honestly asking yourself what they mean to you. So if like we're prickly over certain spiritual terms, we can make a list of them and say, okay, why? And then to see, now, do these have anything to do with God or maybe just a certain religion or certain people I know? We examine our prejudices. They say at the start, this was all we needed to commence our spiritual growth. We have to begin where we are. Say, we have to ask ourselves but one short question. It's actually not really a short question, but anyway, do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe, that there is a power greater than myself? Willing means accepting by choice. So I can make a decision, you know, like, is there a God? Is there not? I can make a decision, you know what? I'm just going to accept by choice that there is. And when we do, you know, I heard someone say once, hold on to your hat because you are in for the ride of your life, right? Um, it says, as soon as a man or woman can say they believe or is willing to believe, they are on their way. Upon this simple cornerstone of willingness to believe, a wonderfully effective spiritual structure can be built. I say, this is great news because we thought we couldn't practice spiritual principles unless we accepted many things in faith. And a good exercise is to go through this book, looking through all the spiritual principles: honesty, self-sacrifice, tolerance of people whose views are different. Say, we can start doing that right away. We can do what we know. Page 48 says, here's some other things that handicap us. Obstinacy. That's a stubborn refusal to change our opinion. But I don't know about y'all, but sometimes I would rather like be right than get healed. Well, not anymore. That's how I used to be. I wanted to be right at all costs. Now I want to be healthy at all costs. Sensitiveness, that's like no one can say anything. People feel like they're walking on eggshells when they're around us. And unreasoning prejudice. We talked about that one. They say, this kind of thinking had to be abandoned. So we can do that. We can say, okay, my obstinacy, sensitiveness, unreasoning prejudice, I am putting you aside. And they say, though some of us resisted, we didn't really find a great difficulty casting aside such feelings when, again, we realize there's two doors: compulsive eating destruction or become open-minded on spiritual matters. And so this is important. They say, in this respect, alcohol, or for us, food, was a great persuader. It finally beat us into a state of reasonableness. So someone is not sure, like they want to do this, like, I don't know if I want to do the spiritual approach. I don't know if I'm willing to go to any lengths. It is not my job to persuade him or her. That is the job of the illness. That is food's job, to beat us into a state of reasonableness. And then they say, okay, someone may still say, why should I believe in a power greater than myself? And then they give this like a couple pages about a prosaic steel girder, which I have no idea what it is. All these years of doing this chapter, I don't think I've ever looked it up what a prosaic steel girder is, but I get the point. The point is that we can use and believe some things we don't understand. So, for instance, I do not understand electricity. How electricity, whatever it is, I can't even define what it is, gets from out there somewhere through wires into my house, up to a lamp that I put a switch gives me light. I have no idea how that happens. Like, how do people handle, like, I don't know. But I still use it because I don't want to sit in the dark. And if I don't want to be spiritually in the dark, I need to plug into God the same way like I plug my lamps into the socket. So again, I still don't really know what a prosaic steel girder is, but I think we can make it through this chapter without ever learning what that is. Um, Page 49, it's like, yeah, we can believe in electricity and stuff like that without really understanding it. But when the perfectly logical assumption is suggested that underneath the material world and life as we see it is an all powerful, again, more names about God, more clues, all powerful, guiding, right? Again, not watching Netflix, guiding us, creative intelligence. Right there, we become perverse and set out to say it isn't true and this universe needs no God. They say, instead of regarding ourselves, so again, I get to choose how I regard myself, right? Like I can decide if I'm smart or stupid. You know, who's going to tell me I'm wrong? Like I can regard myself either way. So they say, instead of regarding ourselves as intelligent agents, spearheads of God's ever advancing creation, we agnostics and atheists chose to believe our human intelligence was the last word. So we're intelligent agents, right? And in chapter 5, it tells us that God is the principle. The principle has work that the agent does. So I'm an intelligent agent, spearhead. So think of like a spear, and on the head of it is like me, right? And what am I on the spearhead of? God's ever advancing creation. Well, didn't he just create the world in 6 days and then like take a day off? What's he creating now? Isn't it all created? No. Remember our book says he's recreating us. He's creating new us. That's what he's doing. Like this is caterpillar to butterfly stuff. And they say, we've traveled this path. We beg of you to lay aside your prejudices, even against organized religion. So if that's on our prejudice list, they say, lay it aside. The frailties of various faiths, and they all have frailties, but they've given purpose and direction to millions. You know, there's like people, let's say, who may say, oh, the Catholic Church does this, that, and the other. Well, the Catholic Church also produced Mother Teresa and Dorothy Day. So it's like, that's the kind of stuff we should be looking at. And they say, people of faith know what life is about. We didn't before. We used to amuse ourselves by cynically dissecting spiritual beliefs and practices. So we can't be cynical. We can say sometimes, yeah, that practice isn't for me, but I don't have the luxury of being cynical. And says, here's what we should observe. that many spiritually minded people of all races, colors, and creeds were demonstrating a degree of stability, happiness, and usefulness which we should have sought ourselves. Right? Like, what good is it, even if I were to like to know the Bible backwards and forwards, if I wasn't stable, happy, and useful? And that's what this program promises us. That's the kind of spirituality this program promises us. That's what's promised to us when we get a right relationship with God. Page 50. We looked at the human defects of these people and sometimes use their shortcomings as a basis of wholesale condemnation. It's like black and white thinking. And I remember one time I was driving somewhere and there was a car that cut us off. And I saw the license plate and it was like from a state where I didn't know anyone. And immediately, like my thoughts went to, oh, people from that state are just jerks. Right? That was like a prejudice, like using one thing as a basis of wholesale condemnation. And then I remembered a girl I knew in OA who was from that state, and she was really sweet. So that was helpful. But it was a good lesson to me, right? About how easily I can just get into that wholesale condemnation. It says we talked of intolerance, but weren't we intolerant ourselves? And they say, in our personal stories, you'll find a wide variation in the way each teller approaches and conceives of the power which is greater than himself. That is the point of telling our stories when we get better. It is not supposed to be 15 minutes of how I binged, and then 2 minutes of what I did to get better, and then 3 minutes of how life is great. It's supposed to be, how did I approach and conceive of God? How did I get my relationship with God? Whenever someone's going to tell her story and she says she's nervous about it, I just remind her, and I remind myself, it's not about us. It's about making God the hero of the story. So then there's nothing to worry about. Just look to make him the hero because, of course, he is. And they say, okay, there's different ways people approach and conceive of this power greater than themselves. But on one proposition, they are strikingly agreed. All of them have gained access to and believe in a power greater than himself. And this power has in each case accomplished the miraculous, which is defined as humanly impossible. So this is what our stories should contain, and this is what a recovered person should have. They believe in God. They've gained access to God. That means God's power is working through them. Now, that doesn't mean I can say abracadabra and, like levitate someone or something. No, it means like I have the power to like not binge anymore. I have the power to be nice to people. Like I get intuitive thoughts sometimes about what I'm supposed to do. So the other day, I, lived in New Jersey for a number of years, moved to North Carolina. My husband set up a handyman business. And a woman I knew back in New Jersey who lives a solid 30 minutes away will call my husband for a little job. And he would go and drive out there and help her. And, you know, and I would think, gosh, like, he's like not making any money. He's driving out there and she shouldn't be asking him and he shouldn't be going. And then I just, I'm walking, I'm praying. I'm like, Janet, okay. So I say, none of my business, stay in my lane. What my husband wants to do with his time. It's not like he's neglecting me or our house. None of my business. And then I got this intuitive thought. Janet, remember when you lived in New Jersey and you were in, a small group of women that meant to like study the Bible or something once a week, and you didn't drive at night, she came and she picked you up every once a week. I hadn't thought of that, but that intuitive thought came to me, and I'm like, okay, okay, shame on me. Um, and not that I got mad at myself, but it was like this intuitive thought that helped me to see things, from God's perspective, and that God was arranging things to help my husband because he loves puttering around other people's houses fixing things, and he loves the scenic drive out in to the boondocks where she lives, and she gets help. So it's like a win, 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 win all the way around. Intuitive thought. And they continue on, bottom of page 50. Here are thousands of men and women, worldly indeed. So, like, we're not all Skid Row bums. A lot of us have jobs, families. They flatly declare that since they've come to believe in a power greater than themselves, so faith, to take a certain attitude toward that power, surrender, right? Because I could believe in God and say, I believe in you, God, but I could care less about what you want. Doesn't work. And we'll see that when we get to step 3. Believe, take a certain attitude toward that power and do certain simple things. Clear away the wreckage of our past, help others. There's been a revolutionary change in our way of living and thinking, right? A spiritual experience in the face of collapse and despair. So it doesn't matter how far down we are. In the face of a total failure, a 100% failure of our human resources, what do we get? We found that a new power, that's our problem, right? Lack of power. Power, but not only power. This is what else we get. Power, peace, right? Peace, happiness, and sense of direction flowed into them. So not like it was in me all along, like a Star Wars thing, the force. Then no, it flows into me from God. This happens soon. So not like 10 years from now, after we wholeheartedly met a few simple requirements. Work these steps. Once confused and baffled by the seeming futility of existence, they say why life was so hard, page 51 now, leaving aside the drink question. So even if we're abstinent, like if we're white knuckling it, we can still be miserable. They say living was so unsatisfactory. Then they show how the change came over them. When many hundreds of people are able to say that the consciousness of the presence of God is today the most important fact of their lives, they present a powerful reason why one should have faith. So again, I can choose whether or not I'm willing to believe in God. And then what an invitation. The people, hundreds of people, are able to say the realization that like God is like alive and present with me is the most important thing in my life. Well, to me, that's a good reason why we should choose willingness. So we will stop here and pick up with the rest of We Agnostics soon, but we will stop on that note for tonight.